Hi there, welcome to Campus Interaction. In this course, we'll look at variables and methods. So, the topics we'll be covering are what is a method, why is it needed, how to create a method, what are variables, and where and how it is used. Pretty logical. Basically, why, what, when, where questions. And we'll also look at interview questions. We'll look at several examples in this method so you'll understand it a bit better. So what are variables? Let's look at how values are stored in our computer. Values are stored in memory, computer memory. Everybody knows that. It has a pointer, so it has an address. So just like how we have an house address, every value in the memory has an address. So we can access that value. So I've just made up this address called 0180432, length 9 characters. But if you think about it, for me to do that in my coding, and if I have to start putting the pointers length, it gets very messy. I have to do memory management, I have to do pointer management, I have to do length management. All this typically gets very tedious, very complex, leads to a lot of bugs in the code. In legacy application, this is how it was used. Like for an example, COBOL, I know, I've coded COBOL before. You would define the length. So in lot of times, what happens if the length, is not enough? That's how the whole, I don't know if you have heard about this or if Google it. When we moved from 1999 to 2000, what happened was lot of COBOL programs had pix x of 2, which means it can take only 2 characters. Until 1999, they could store only the last 2 characters of a century, 99. So when they started COBOL back in 50s, 60s, they didn't anticipate this to be an issue. They didn't expect this to this long. But mainframe, even now, a lot of big companies use mainframe. So the whole Y2K problem, if you search Y2K in Google, whole Y2K problem came because of this. So all we had to do was, as a programmers, go change it to X of 4. But it would be in millions and millions lines of code. We have to go and change, test it, all that. Because of that, a lot of people got job. A lot of Indians, got job, which is a good thing. So in modern languages such as Java, we don't define a length. I'll show you how to define a variable. Basically, variables, as you know now, are to store a value. So it can be anything from string to number to boolean. So let's look at some coding. So let's methods and variables. I think I've already coded some, so that's okay. We can code again. So private, always define the variable as private, or in this case let's put it as public, but I will explain what private and public in a course called access modifiers. String first name, public string last. Let's define a boolean value, public boolean male or female, or let's simply say true or false. Public int I. Okay, that's how define. So value can be anything from string to number to boolean. Can be at the class level or inside the method. See, this is right under the class, so it's called class level variables. Nothing complicated in that. So if it's right under the class, it's class level variables. If it's defined right under the method, it's called method level variables. So class level variables initialized automatically to default values. What does it mean? Let's see. Let's print these values. So public static void, man, you should know how to run a code and print your values by now if you have seen my previous courses. Let's say first name. So let's copy that and then we have already printed a string, so I'll ignore last name. So let's print true or false, and then print I. Let's put colon just so that we know what it prints, just to have some clarity, that's all. So what does it say? Non-static variable first name cannot be referenced from a static context. I'll explain what it is later on, but to avoid this, let's simply define a method. How do you define a method? Simple, called public. I'm not going to return value, void, say print, give some name. Let's keep it very simple, and then move this here. Simple. And then from here, in fact, I'll call this from a different class. Okay, let's call it from here, PSVM, and then methods. You should know how to create an object by now, by a new keyword. So method dot print value. Let's run this and see. So I haven't set any values. Let's run it and see. So if you see, my first name is printed as null. What it tells me is, you haven't done anything. I don't know what you're talking about. Okay, I don't know what object. So if I call it as null. Empty doesn't mean that it's not a value. It is a value. Empty is also a value. So if you don't want to set any values, it should be null. So by default, all objects or all string becomes null. Boolean by default becomes false. So if you want to set it true, you need to explicitly set it as true. All numbers gets initialized to 0. What does initialize means? Initialize means nothing but you're setting a value. So if you haven't set a value for a class level variable, it sets on its own. So let's look at what happens to method level variable. Let's type int j. Sout j. Let's try and use that. If you see, the compiler is giving an error. Variable j might not have been initialized. It's exactly the same. I've defined a class level I. I've used it here. Nothing happens because the compiler initializes the class level variable automatically to its default value. But method level variable have to be initialized. When you say have to be initialized, I have to set a value. That's all it is. So 0. It could be 0, it could be 10, anything. So run it. It prints it. Simple. If you see, method level variables have to be explicitly initialized. Class level variables are available for entire object. What does that mean? If you see, let's look at some example. If you see, we don't have to go for a new example. If you see, this is class level variable. I could use it inside this method, right? Let's look at another method. Public void method sample. Let's say sout first name. Let's try and use the class level variable again. So there's no compilation error, not an issue. Let's try and use this method level variables. It's defined inside a method, so it's called a method level variable. Let's try and use that. See, you get a compilation error. What it says, cannot find symbol. What the compiler will look is, it will look whether first when you call a variable, it will see whether it's inside that method, inside that block of code. If it's not there, it will jump this. So if you see, it will close this. That's what it will see. So it will close this. That's what it will see. Then it will look if it's there. So if I put I, it will work. Yeah. So that's what it is. Class level variables are available for entire object, or should I say objects, for all objects. Let's say when I say all objects initialize from this class. So let's look at an example. Let me remove this. Let's create another class, invoke method. I've already had some code, remove that. So let's look at some example. So in order for me to send some values, let's remove all this. Let's call runs. You'll know why I've called runs in a minute. Then if I want to pass annually, you either pass it through via a method, but this time I'll pass it via the constructor. So public methods and variable, you should know how to call a constructor. So let's pass the values: string f name, string l name, string runs. So first name equal to f name, last name equal to l name, to, can I say runs equal to runs? Okay, look, the compiler got confused. It says assignment to itself because it takes this runs and assign it to itself. So how do I differentiate if both has the same name? First of all, can I have the same name? A simple solution be you can say call one, or you say this. This means belongs to this object. What's the error now? Okay, it says boolean. Okay, I have to call it as int. Int. Yeah, this means this object. So in this I'm picking a value. So if you say this and hit that, it say all these will come through, first name, last name. So that's how you differentiate. This means this object. Remember that there will be lot of things we'll be writing based on this. So this means it's not this class, this object. Remember that. So let's do that. Let's create methods and variables equal to new method. Let's say Sachin Tendulkar runs Sachin editor. Okay, or let's call it as object A. You don't have a colon. Okay, before we go that, let me show you something. So to explain this better, let's look at this example. So I have a class called first name last name runs. I'm going to create an object A, Sachin Tendulkar. Sachin as the first name, Tendulkar as the second name, last name, and 92 runs. He's on 92 runs. Let's look at object B. I've called it as MS as the first name, Dhoni as the last name, and 45 runs. Let's see how we can programmatically create this. So object A, I passed the values. So if I want to print the values, South of first name object A first name, last name, and then finally runs. Let's align this, it'll look nicer. So if I run this, it prints Sachin Tendulkar 92. So let's say if you want to go and do the same and pass the value as Dhoni. Object B, so MS Dhoni, let's say is on 45. Let's run this. So it'll go and print Sachin Tendulkar 92. Why is that Sachin Tendulkar 92 again? Because I haven't changed object A. This is a typical example where, let's say I've created object A, set the value, and I've created object B, pass something else. It doesn't overwrite object A, as I've told, or as soon as I put new, it puts it in a new memory location. And then as soon as I put the second new, it puts into the other memory location. It doesn't overwrite it. So this is a good example how you prove it doesn't overwrite. So if I run this, there you go. So that's pretty straightforward. So let's go back to our example. Not this one. So we have created object A, object. Now let's say I want to have a partnership. What is the partnership between Sachin and MS Dhoni? With the partnership, I don't want to store the partnership in two places exactly the same value. I want to have it in one place. So what is the best place to have? Is the class. Because from the class you create objects. So if I store that value within the class itself, the objects we can point to it. So how do I do it? So this is how a partnership is. How do I do it? You do that with something called static keyword. What static means is, this is static. Okay, this belongs to me. It's not dynamic. You don't go and create values like how I pass Sachin, all that. Whatever you pass, I'll store it only once. It's static. So let's call public int partnership, right? Static. Simple. So you put a static keyword, it belongs to him, no one else, to that class. So if I go there and say, okay, I need to add the value. So let's say, but also look at when I define the static, it available for at the class level. I don't have to create an object. Let's say 92 plus 45, 97, 137. I set the value as 137, right? So that's the value. I've set it at the class level. So if you see object B, I've set it at I haven't created from an object A or object at the class level. If you go back to my diagram, here I went and set this value. I didn't access it via that. So if I put partnership, right? So object B partnership. Yeah. So let's see what happens. See, again I set the value at the class level. I'm trying to access at the object. So run file. It sets the value 137. So that clearly proves when I set the value at the class level by defining as static, when I access it via object, any object, it gives me the same value. So you use static if you want to store value at the class level and multiple objects refer to it. You don't want to dynamically create values like first name and last name. So for an example, I can't access methods and variable example and say first name. Compiler will give an error because it will say it belongs to that object, not to you. But if I put it at the class level, it's at one place. Any object can access, but it's always one value. Okay. So I think that's pretty clear. So let's go back to what else is there. So class level builds are available for all objects. Yeah, I've proved it to you. It's available for entire class including all methods. Method level variable are available only for that method. Use static keyword to share a variable for all objects, so which I've shown you. Let's see what constants is. Constants are very simple. So if you want to define a value where you don't want anyone to change, simple. Call it as final. Okay. Okay, as soon as you define a final, you need to set the value. Let's say 100. Right? So let's run it and see. Okay. Okay, I just wanted to show you that error. See, if you see, as soon as you set it as final, you can't change it. So why do you want to use it? Say for an example, I always want to call, maybe the partnership is not a good example. Let's remove that. Maybe I always want to call cricket public, sorry, final it doesn't have to be static also, but let's say static public final static string cricket board name. So I don't want anyone to change my value, let's say BCCI. So if once I define that, no one can change. So wherever I access, let's say South cricket board name, object B big, okay, so cricket board name, wherever I access it will be the same value. So if I run it, it would be same very obviously. Yeah, BCCI, simple. So that's how we define a constant. Constant, you call it as final. Final means no one can change. Some of you might question, okay, now I can go and change it here, like let's say ECB, England Cricket Board. But when they say no one can change it, not programmatically, through when you invoke the call, like how I change it here. How I change it here, like Sachin Tendulkar 92. I put the first name as Sachin. Here I change the first name to MS. I can have a partnership on 37. In the next line I can change it to 150. But you can't do that for cricket board name. The reason, no. Again you can question, no, I can go and change this, compile it and run it. So no, what's a big deal? But if you think about it, when you create a class, what you will do is you will create class files and give it to someone. You zip it up, you call it as jar. I'll cover it in other chapters. You zip it up and give the zip to someone. Even if they open a zip, it's a class, they can't understand, you don't give a source. So they can call your methods or your classes. When they do that, you don't want them to change your cricket board name. Yeah, so that's the reason why you need constants. So we have covered constants, we have covered static keyword. Pretty good. So let's move on to the next slide. So methods, you would have seen the method. Methods are to provide some action like printing a value. If you want to add values, anything you want to do an action, create a method. We have seen how to create a method. Always should either define a return type or void. Let's look at that. So I have method and let's say, okay, I don't I have only this. Here I have methods. Again, it's let's print a method public. Let's say let's return a value int. Return runs. Let's say. So I can simply say return runs. What it does is it takes the value runs and return. So if you see, I can print it. Out returned runs. Simple object B return runs. So if I run it, it has returned the runs I passed in, right? So that's how you define. So you can also pass values like string first name. You can pass any number of name. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. What happens if you don't want to return anything? You still can't change the structure of the method, but you simply call it as void. See, it gives an error. You can't return any value. You can decide not to do any action. It's pretty dumb, but you can define a method without any values inside. But you can also do things like, because within a method I can access class level variables. I can say runs equal to, let's say, plus partnership. It should be partnership. Okay, I can't access static inside a method. But this is a good example. Let's do this. Partnership. Yeah. What it tells me is I can't because I missed the colon, it gave me an error, but I can access static within a partnership. What I can't do is I can't change the cricket board name. As soon as I put cricket board dot, let's say, name equal to, say, let's say ECB, it'll give an error, right? Because it's a final. Okay. Now let's say another example is you've said static is at the only for the at the class level. It's not allocated for method. It's only one instance. Any objects can use it. It'll always get one value. What happens if you define it for method? In fact, we have defined that before. Hold on, I'll show you. Public static void. Yeah. What's this error? Okay, let's look into that later on. Okay, I don't have a return. Once you define a method as static, it belongs to the class, which means instance variables like this should not be used within the static because it's belong to that class. The instance variable, which is belongs to that object, should not be used for the class level. Remember that. As soon as you define the method as static, I should have only inside that I should have variables only which is static. So if I change it to partnership, it'll work, right? So if you see, okay, it doesn't have. I'll remove that. So how do you call method which is at the class level? Simple. Similar to static variable, you can just call return runs. See, 22 something. So that's how you call return runs. Let's look at what the error is. Oh, it's a string, that's why. Okay, I'll pass some value A B B something. So without creating an object, I can access the method at the class level. But remember, method which defines as static can access only static variables. It can't access instance variables. When you say instance variables, class level instance variable, method level instance variable. Class level instance variables are these where it doesn't have anything called static. So, and methods can be public, private, protected, or default. I'll cover that in access modifier course. And we have looked at coding. Let's look at some interview questions. Can I access a method level variable outside of that method? You know the answer. You can't. It'll give a compilation error. Can I use a class level without initializing it? Yes. I've said this, class level variables are initialized automatically. When method and class level method and class level variables are initialized, class level variables are initialized automatically by the compiler. As soon as you put new, all the class level variables are initialized to its default value. When I say default value, string to null, which means I don't know anything about this, boolean to false, and numbers to 0. But method level variables, you have to explicitly initialize it. How can I define a variable so all objects can access it? You know the answer. You define it by keyword called static. Then how can I define a concept so no one can change it? You can call it as public. Final. As soon as you put the final keyword, no one can change it. When I say no one can change it, programmatically. When I say programmatically, by creating an object and changing the value. Like first name I set it as Sachin, and then created another object, change the value to MS. I also created a partnership which is a static keyword. I set the value 135, again I change the value. But if you don't want any of them to do, you call it as final. Nothing can happen. Can I not return any value in a method? Yes, of course. Call it as void. So you don't have to return. Can I call a method without creating an object? That's a good question. Can I call a method without creating an object? Yes, of course. I've shown you how it's done. You call the method with a static keyword. So you say static in front of that. So public static, void, or return value, then the method name. Then you can call without creating an object, because as soon as you put it as static, it belongs to that class. So all you could do is just call the class name dot, and whether it's a variable or a method, you can call it. So put static, it belongs to the class. What it also means is, another question you think about, if you have listened to this tutorial, you can answer this. Can I access an instance variable within a static method? That's a question for you. You find out the answer. If you go back to, if you don't know the answer, listen to this tutorial again. Again, the question is, can I access an instance variable inside a static method? It's a definite interview question. You go and find out. Okay, that's all for now, folks. I'll see you shortly. Thank you.